Every nation in Europe was built on layers. Romans came, Moors came, Vikings came, steppe warriors came, and when they left their DNA behind. Every single population on this continent carries the marks of those waves. Every population, except one. There is a group of people living right now, in the mountains between France and Spain, who watched every single one of those invasions happen around them. And somehow, none of those invaders left a single genetic trace, not the Romans. So not the Moors, not the Visigoths, nobody. Their DNA today looks like it belongs to a world that stopped existing 2,500 years ago. Scientists call it a genetic singularity, a one-of-a-kind case, something that, by every rule of population genetics, should not exist. These are the Basques, and their story is one of the most unsettling mysteries in all of human genetics. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? Sorry, and have you ever had a DNA test done? What did it tell you? Because what you're about to hear might make you look at that result in a completely different way. And if this kind of story, hidden DNA, forgotten histories, ancient mysteries, is what you come here for, then subscribe right now. We do this every single week. Now, to understand what makes the Basques so strange, you first have to understand one thing about their language. The Basque language is called Euskara, and it has no family. Every language you've ever heard of belongs to a family. Spanish, French, Italian, all Romance languages descended from Latin. English, German, Dutch, all Germanic. Hindi, Persian, Russian, all Indo-European. These families go back thousands of years and connect billions of people. Euskara connects to nothing. It is not related to any language alive today, not to any dead language we've ever found. It stands completely alone, a linguistic island in a sea of related tongues. Linguists estimate it's been spoken in the same region for at least 10,000 years, possibly longer. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When geneticist David Comas at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona led the largest Basque DNA study ever conducted, 190 individuals, over 600,000 genetic markers each, published in Current Biology in 2021. His team found something that nobody expected. The genetic wall around the Basques didn't start at the beginning of their history. It started exactly 2,500 years ago, right at the Iron Age. And what happened 2,500 years ago, that's when the world around them started speaking Indo-European languages, Latin, Celtic, Iberian, languages that spread with migration, with trade, with empire, languages that everyone around the Basques adopted. Everyone except them. Comas's team found that within the Basque country itself, a tiny region, genetic clusters match almost perfectly with ancient dialect zones of Euskara. Not mountain ranges, not rivers, dialect lines. People were marrying within the sound of a familiar accent. For 100 generations. The language wasn't just communication, it was a genetic filter. But here's the thing nobody tells you. The Basques were not always isolated. For thousands of years before the Iron Age, like they mixed freely with everyone around them. They received the same waves of migration that hit the rest of Europe. Their DNA, up until 2,500 years ago, was not dramatically different from their neighbors. So, what happened in Europe before that? And why did the Basques eventually close the door? To understand that, you have to go all the way back, 40,000 years back, before farming, before metal, before cities. Europe was full of hunter-gatherers, small groups of people moving across a wild, cold continent, hunting animals, following rivers. Scientists call them Western hunter-gatherers, WHG. These people left no writing, no monuments, but they left DNA. And here's the first remarkable fact. Modern Basques carry more Western hunter-gatherer ancestry than almost any other population in Europe today. A genetic echo of a world that largely vanished thousands of years ago is still alive in them. Then, around 7,000 years ago, farmers from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, began moving into Europe. They brought wheat, cattle, pottery. They were a completely different genetic type. And wherever they went, they mixed with or replaced the hunter-gatherers. In 2015, a team at Harvard, led by Íñigo Olalde, excavated an ancient cave site called El Portalón at Sierra de Atapuerca in northern Spain. They pulled DNA from 8 individuals who lived between 5,500 and 3,500 years ago, ancient Iberian Neolithic farmers. When they compared those ancient genomes to modern populations, the closest living match was the Basques. Not distant cousins, the closest match. This means the Basques are the direct genetic descendants of the first farmers who entered the Iberian Peninsula thousands of years ago, people who themselves had already mixed with local hunter-gatherers. And they weren't primitives frozen in time. They were a population that formed, mixed, stabilized, and then held that shape, while everything around them kept changing. But then something arrived that would change Europe forever, and it came from the east, moving fast. Around 5,000 years ago, a group of people left the vast grasslands north of the Black Sea, a region called the Pontic-Caspian Steppe. Archaeologists call them the Yamnaya. And what they did to European genetics is almost impossible to describe without sounding extreme. But the data is clear. In Central and Northern Europe, Yamnaya ancestry replaced between 60 and 75% of the existing gene pool. Within just a few centuries, an entire genetic world gone. In Iberia, Inigo Olalde's 2019 study in Science analyzed 271 individuals spanning 8,000 years of history. The result, 40% of all Iberian ancestry was replaced by steppe migrants. And the male Y chromosome, the line passed from father to son, was almost completely replaced. One of the most extreme sex-biased replacements ever found in human prehistory. The Yamnaya brought with them the ancestor of every Indo-European language spoken in Europe today. Their genetics are in Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, and nearly every other European population, nearly everyone. When the Basques carry Yamnaya ancestry too, but significantly less than every single surrounding population. The wave reached them, it touched them, but something blunted it. And here is the discovery that genuinely surprised the scientists. The 2021 COMAS study showed that Basque genetic isolation did not begin when the Yamnaya arrived. It began much later, during the Iron Age, about 2,500 years ago, after the Yamnaya migration had already partially entered their gene pool. This means it wasn't geography that stopped the mixing. It wasn't even a military defense. The Basques made a choice. At a specific moment in history, they turned inward. They stopped letting outsiders in, and we know exactly why. Because the science now points directly at one cause, their language. Now, let's talk about what the Romans tried to do here, because this is where the history gets almost embarrassing for one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. Julius Caesar conquered Gaul in 8 years. Augustus spent decades pushing through Hispania, forcing every tribe in Iberia into submission. Roman roads, Roman laws, Roman culture, they reshaped everything they touched. And yet, David Comas's 2021 study confirmed something remarkable. The Romans left no detectable genetic trace in the Basque population. None. The Romans reached them. They traded with them. They documented them, calling them the Vascones. But they never absorbed them. The Moors swept across the Iberian Peninsula in the 700 CE in one of the fastest military expansions in history. They transformed the genetics of Spain and Portugal in ways still visible today. North African and Middle Eastern ancestry is clearly present in Iberian genomes. But in the Basque country, the COMAS study found no North African influence of the kind seen in the rest of Iberia. And then there's Charlemagne, August 15th, 778 CE. When the rear guard of Charlemagne's army, the most powerful military force in Christian Europe at the time, was moving through a mountain pass in the Pyrenees called Roncevaux. They were ambushed, slaughtered, Charlemagne's finest soldiers gone in hours. The attackers were Basques, not defending against Moors, not defending against pagans, defending their mountain pass against a supposed ally. Because nobody, not friend, not enemy, not empire, walked through Basque territory uninvited. The military history and the genetic history tell the exact same story. A people who defended their physical world the same way they defended their biological one, with absolute refusal to compromise. But how did they actually do it? How does a culture maintain genetic isolation for 3,000 years without a written law saying, don't marry outsiders? The answer is in something called the Basque. The Basque is the traditional Basque farmhouse. And it was not just a building. It was the center of Basque society, legal identity, and inheritance. In most of medieval Europe, property passed through the male line, father to son, patrilineal, rigid, tied to bloodline. But in traditional Basque law, the farmhouse passed to whoever was most capable of running it, regardless of gender. Basque women held property rights, legal standing, and inheritance control centuries before the rest of Europe gave women any rights at all. This sounds progressive, and it was. But it also had a genetic consequence that nobody planned. When your identity, your name, your inheritance, and your social standing are all tied to a specific piece of land, you don't leave, and you don't bring in strangers easily. Every marriage became a negotiation about land continuity. An outsider threatened that continuity. And protecting the land meant, without anyone deciding this consciously, protecting the gene pool. On top of this, the Basques had legal codes called the fueros, ancient laws so powerful that even the kings of Castile, at the height of Spanish imperial power, had to travel to Basque soil and stand under a specific oak tree to swear they would respect Basque rights. Conquered people don't usually negotiate the terms of their own occupation. This wasn't a primitive society accidentally left behind. It was a sophisticated civilization that built language, law, and land ownership into a single system of preservation. The genetics are just what that system looks like after 100 generations, but walls don't hold forever. In the 1870s, the Basque coast, Bilbao especially, became one of the most industrialized regions in all of Spain. Steel mills, iron mines, shipyards, and economic booms don't respect genetic walls. Workers flooded in from across Spain and beyond. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Basque population was being diluted, not by conquest, not by empire, but by a paycheck. And the genetics reflect it. The 2021 COMAS study found a measurable split between coastal urban Basques and rural inland Basques. People living in the coastal cities showed more outside admixture. The industrial migration left a mark that 3,000 years of Roman roads, Moorish armies, and Frankish cavalry had not. But, and this is important, rural, the inland Basque communities still retained the highest level of ancient ancestry and the lowest amount of outside admixture of any population in all of Western Europe. The wall didn't fall everywhere. It cracked at the edges, and that crack created a political explosion. The Basque nationalist movement, one of the oldest, most persistent, and most complicated in all of Europe, was born directly from this period. At its root, it was not simply a political argument. It was a biological fear. A people who had survived 5,000 years of migrations, invasions, and Bronze Age tsunamis suddenly felt genuinely threatened by factory workers. The genetics that inspired that movement were real. The responses to those genetics were entirely human, which means sometimes peaceful, sometimes desperate, and sometimes brutal. Now we get to the strangest data point in this entire story, the one that has fascinated researchers, confused scientists, and attracted every kind of fringe theory imaginable. Rh-negative blood. In most European populations, about 15% of people are Rh-negative. In the Basque population, that number sits between 30 and 35%, more than double, the highest frequency of Rh-negative blood of any population on Earth. A 2018 study published in Scientific Reports by Fernandez and colleagues confirmed the Basques carry the highest frequency of the Rhd gene deletion, 47.2%, of any tested population. Now, Rh-negative matters medically. When an Rh-negative mother carries an Rh-positive baby, her immune system can recognize the baby's blood as foreign and attack it, a condition called hemolytic disease of the newborn. In populations where Rh-negative is this common, this creates real biological risk. So why is it this high in the Basques? Honestly, scientists don't fully know yet. The most accepted explanation involves founder effects, when a small founding population carries a rare variant at higher frequency. Some in isolation keeps it concentrated across generations. Endogamy amplified it. The closed gene pool prevented it from being diluted. but whether there was also some evolutionary pressure that made Rh negative advantageous in this specific population, that question remains open. Fringe theories have tried to fill this gap for decades: alien ancestry, lost civilizations, supernatural origins. Geneticists dismiss all of it. But they also acknowledge that the extreme frequency is not yet fully explained. The honest answer from science is, we know it's there, we know roughly why it concentrated, but the complete picture is still being written. So let's put this all together. We now know, with peer-reviewed certainty, what the Basques are genetically. We know when their isolation started, around 2,500 years ago in the Iron Age. We know how it was maintained, through language, law, land, during the quiet force of a culture that valued continuity over expansion. We know the cost: accumulated Rh negative frequency, founder effect conditions, genetic risks carried quietly in the blood for generations. Researcher Cristina Valdiosera of the University of Burgos said it most clearly: it is the Basques who are frozen in time, not the people around them. The Basques stayed still, while every other European population kept moving, kept mixing, kept changing. And today, in 2025, the wall is finally dissolving. Not because of any invasion, not because of any empire, but because young Basques living in a connected modern world are making different choices than their ancestors made. The genetic singularity that survived Rome and the Moors and Charlemagne may, within a few generations, be absorbed into the broader European genome, by choice, which raises the question that science can sequence but cannot answer. Was in their laws, ancient codes that kings had to swear to uphold, in a farmhouse passed not by blood, but by loyalty to the land. David Comas, the lead scientist of the 2021 study, said it simply: the Basques are not Martians. They are human, shaped by the same forces as everyone else: migration, isolation, culture, chance. And the difference is, they chose isolation at a moment when the entire world was choosing to mix. And they held that choice, quietly, for 3,000 years. Science can now tell us what that looks like in a genome. What it cannot tell us is whether it was worth it. And perhaps that question was never science's to answer. There is one more population in Europe with a story just as strange. A group whose DNA was supposed to have been erased entirely, and wasn't. When their connection to the Basques is something nobody saw coming, and the evidence came from a single burial site sealed in a cave, untouched for 4,000 years. That story is next.